There we go. Everyone's coming in slowly. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, welcome to the Islamic courses session. We're going to be starting very shortly. Just give me about a few minutes or so just to let people in. And then I will formally start and hand over to my host, Dr. Safaruk Chowdhury. So if you just bear with me in the meantime, can I just request, everyone is already on mute. But if you're not on mute, please put your phones or your PCs or Macs, whatever you're using, on mute. It is being recorded. If you are registered, you'll get a copy of it anyway. We'll send you a link. But if you're not registered, please leave your email address here on the chat and you'll get a copy of the session. And there will be a Q&A session as well. Please write them on the chat as well. So just give me a minute before we will formally start. I just need to make sure I admit everyone as they come in. Okay, I think we'll start now anyway, because I've still got to allow some people in, so we don't want to keep too much time going. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Brothers and sisters, welcome to the Zoom session titled the Jerusalem Epistle on Theology, al-RISALA al-QUDSIYA al-AL-AQA'ID, with Professor, we're honored to have our dear teacher and Ustad Professor Mustafa who's the integral chair for the Ghazali, study of Ghazali, al-Ghazali at al-Masjid al-Aqsa and al-Quds University, Jerusalem. And it's hosted by our dear friend and teacher, Dr. Safaruk Chowdhury, who graduated from SOAS. Right, okay, so without further ado, I just want to quickly remind everyone, please keep your phones or PCs on mute. It is being recorded. If you're not registered already, leave your email address on the chat, and there is a Q&A session. What's going to happen, Dr. Safaruk Chowdhury is going to quickly introduce the subject about the Jerusalem episode, and he's going to introduce Professor Mustafa, and the professor will have around 20 odd minutes to talk about the subject, and then we're going to have some questions and answers or so. We'll have around an hour, just over an hour and 50 minutes maximum, but minimum an hour or so of the Zoom. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to our dear friend and teacher and Ustad Safaruk Chowdhury. Assalamu alaikum, Safaruk. How are you?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Mizan, how are you, my brother?
Alhamdulillah. Sheikh, assalamu alaikum, Professor Mustafa. How are you? Ramadan Kareem, belated, but how's Jerusalem and how are you?
Alhamdulillah. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair.
Barakallahu. Okay, Dr. Safaruk, over to you. Bismillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Afdal salat wa tamu taslim. على أشرف الأنبياء سيد المرسلين نبينا حبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه من تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone, wherever you are around the world. Alhamdulillah, I know Islamic Courses has an international audience, and I really like to thank Mizan for giving me the honor to host our professor this afternoon. Wherever you all are, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep you and your family safe as we climb out of this sort of global lockdown. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep especially those in the blessed lands, in one of which our respected guest resides, al-Quds al-Sharif. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep them well and protect them. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. So I think people are very familiar with the Islamic Courses sort of format, but let me just reiterate what I hope, or how I hope today's session will go. I think we have about an hour. So I will introduce our honourable guest in just a moment. And then before we go into the topic today of Hujjat al-Islam, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali rahimahullah, his al-Risala al-Qudsiyya, what I hope to do is sort of try and set up the professor with some questions, some broader questions before we sort of hone in on the text. And then, sort of after doing that, we hope to sort of open it up to the audience by about half an hour in. I'll try and keep to the time. I'll try and keep to the time. And I'm notorious for being having a lot of latitude with time, but I will try and adhere to it so we can try and get as much discussion from the audience with our honourable guest. So let me just introduce Professor Abu Suway, Hafidhahullah. I can't do obviously justice to our professor, but I'm just going to mention just a few points about his life, achievements and works. On a personal note, I have to say that I finally had the good fortune to meet Sheikh Mustafa in Jordan when I was invited to present there by Kalam Research and Media. I was doing it on the topic of animal theodicy, and I got really encouraging, meticulous feedback from the Sheikh, and I was very, very appreciative of that. And it was great to finally meet him. Those of us who are the 8-bit generation, yeah, you know, who are the Sega Master System, the Nintendo generation, you would know the Sheikh. Alhamdulillah, you would have come familiar with the Sheikh from, like, you know, maybe his appearances on TV, on radio, especially Sharia TV. I think in 2007, you know, there was a special episode in Jerusalem, and the Sheikh was on there, mashallah. So, you know, he has a mashallah, a great following. But let me introduce our respected guests. So, our professor is the first to hold the integral chair for the study of Imam al-Ghazali's works at the Holy al-Aqsa Mosque in al-Quds University. He's also the Dean, College of Da'wah and Usul and College of the Quran and Islamic Studies at al-Quds University. He's a professor of Islamic Studies at al-Quds University, Jerusalem, since 1996. He's taught at the International Islamic University of Malaysia, including a year at the Institute for Islamic Thought and Civilization. He was a visiting Fulbright Scholar in Residence at the Wilkes Honors College, Florida Atlantic University. He was a visiting professor at Bard College, New York. His PhD was on al-Ghazali. The dissertation title is The Development of al-Ghazali's Genetic Epistemology. He's authored a number of books, and let me just mention 3 of them here. The first of them is al-Ghazali's Epistemology, the case of al-Ghazali, that was printed in Kuala Lumpur. Fatawa al-Ghazali, that was also printed in Kuala Lumpur. He's just recently, I think, with Q Publications, he did a treasury of al-Ghazali as part of their series. I think that was in 2017. And he's edited a number of books and written a number of articles, and fortunately they've been translated from English, Arabic into many different languages. So we're really, really honored to have the professor, and we're really appreciative for him giving his time today. So let me just proceed. But before going into the topic, if I may request, Professor, if you could say a few words sort of about things that you've been recently doing, and perhaps anything in the pipeline, just so our audience could get a rounded familiarity with yourself and, of course, with the work that you're doing.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا باركا فيه والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. ربنا اغفر لنا والإخوان اللي سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. First of all, جزاكم الله خيرا. بارك الله فيكم. Thank you very much really for hosting me, and it's the honor is mine, and Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen for this the ability to connect in during these times and other times, but especially when there is a pandemic. Imagine years ago we would not be able to connect like this. So there are still ni'am that we are enjoying when there is like tribulation prevalent. And yes, we in Jerusalem, like other places, we did heed the call and the Islamic Waqf Council, which I am a member.
Yeah.
Really, what we did, we issued a statement asking people not to come to Al-Aqsa Mosque in the meanwhile, but all the 5 prayers are, are held at Al-Aqsa Mosque with a limited number of people, limited to Waqf personnel, imams, and officials. So, for example, today, alhamdulillah, I was able to pray the Jumu'ah at Al-Aqsa Mosque, but again, we kept a real distance between us, having the masks, and as I said, it's a very small number of people, but we are holding the prayers, and there is Taraweeh, but it's limited in terms of people. It pains us. Literally, the first Friday when I went to Al-Aqsa Mosque, I had tears in my eyes because of this emptiness. We usually have about a couple of 100,000 people. filling this space, but I found some kind of solace in the idea that the space is not empty. The space is full with the angels who are really with us all the time. In fact, Imam al-Ghazali, when he speaks about the mysteries of prayer, and where he reaches giving salam at the end of the prayer, he says, have the intention that this salam is to the people and the angels. Okay, so subhanallah, this is it's part of what we face. Inshallah, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that there will be relief from this pandemic and every tribulation, but life cannot go without these tests. It tests faith, but also it tests our faith in our scholars. It tests our faith in our politicians. It tests our faith on various levels. But when we make dua with the certitude, believing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will relieve us from the burden of this particular pandemic, the coronavirus, in the way he saved us from so many things in our lives, but especially saved us from the darkness of dalal and led us to this path of light, to the path of Islam, which is really a blessing that inshallah we will enjoy, and we will do whatever is necessary to share and grow together in this faith, believing that humanity, with all due respect, I know that there are wonderful people on the personal level who mean very well, but I think the very last front for humanity obviously is Islam. And by sharing this, it's, as I said, there are wonderful people, in different realms who are trying to do something, but no, we know very well it's Islam, but we need to understand the message. And I thank you for this opportunity. We need to understand that message of Islam. And really the work of Imam al-Ghazali is about reintroducing the notion of spirituality because it was lost. And imagine, this is really during his time, mind you, during our time. So it's a simple introduction about really what's going on in this part of the world.
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh, for that. Okay, so if I can just sort of start with some sort of a little warm-up, if you don't mind. And okay, so just as a maybe it's a related question because it's to do with Hujjat al-Islam as well. Your PhD was on the genetic epistemology of al-Ghazali. Would you be able to give a few some points about what the topic is and what was it about?
What I did, first of all, one needs to understand is that I had no intention of doing my dissertation on Imam al-Ghazali, and until today I try to go back to a moment where, how did I really choose? I don't know. So I'm simply acknowledging we should. This is really a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because my intention was to do a doctoral dissertation on Islamic philosophy of science, one way or the other. So somehow it just became al-Ghazali, and somehow it became his epistemology. And the question became, the primary question is, did Imam Ghazali change his sources of knowledge when he became a Sufi? And this, remember, we talk about one of the brightest, intellects in the history of humanity, not only in the history of Islam. He knew the sciences of his time. If you just read his books on logic, his ability early on, people will add usul al-fiqh later on in their lives. He just simply began. So really there was like no, he just simply jumped into deep waters, if you will. So in terms of traditional scholarship, he was brilliant. He already added to the Islamic library so many books in jurisprudence, al-Basit wal-Wasit wal-Wajiz in the Shafi'i school. In Ihya Ulumuddin, you can see the comparative notes. And at one point, when he dealt with purification, with wudu, with ablution, he subscribed to the Maliki position, and he explained why. Because of the scarcity of water, he said. This is something, and you just see these beautiful comparisons with the other schools. He was knowledgeable of what was going on. And scholars from the Hanbali, in fact, the Shaykh al-Hanabila, Abu Wafa ibn Aqil, I mean, this is very beautiful. He crossed, like, I mean, they had literally schools on their own, the different, schools of Islamic jurisprudence, but they went to attend Imam al-Ghazali's lectures, okay? And their colleagues blamed them for doing this, like it probably is not good for the reputation of one's own school. But it's this kind of personality. He reached, probably in terms of provenance, no one has ever reached, and out of a sudden he decided to give up all this, to give up his position, to give up his money. He kept a little bit for his family. He distributed the money, and he went into a life of incognito, because just compared to earlier on, he had all this connection with those in authority, with the Khalifa, with the Sultan, with the Nizam al-Mulk, who established these wonderful schools to protect our Aqidah is preserved. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enabled Nizam al-Mulk to establish these Nizamiya schools, institutes, colleges, call it whatever you'd like to call it. He knew what he was doing, Nizam al-Mulk. And I think we don't mention him enough. He was killed by the Batinite, by the Ismailiyya. He was fasting, subhanallah, and they killed his son. They killed the political and religious elites, so that the path will be empty for their own dua to call people for their own path. And Imam al-Ghazali wrote systematically against the Batinites until very late, later on. Several works of Imam al-Ghazali were directed totally or partially in anti-Ismaili, anti-Batinite theological discourses. But again, the question was whether Imam al-Ghazali changed the sources. I would say that there are certain statements that would be repeated, but in al-Muqaddim al-Dalal, when he says that ultimately it was not an orderly, logical proof. No, it was a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has cast his breast. And this is something that you need to taste. This is something that you need to open up your heart to. It's not something that you can read and then just simply acquire like the other sciences.
Jazakallah Shaykh for that. And as some people say on this point you mentioned, that later on in his life, his sources of knowledge sort of changing. Normally the mutakallimun were evidentialist. So they would say that we should have beliefs based on evidence. And especially when it comes to matters of mu'taqadat, like your beliefs, the evidence must be, you have to have tasdiq jazim. So there's got to be some kind of yaqeen or sort of certain evidence, certainty. It has to be qat'i. And if you don't base your mu'taqadat on something qat'i, you're violating your epistemic duty. But it looks like Ghazali later on is shifting to a non-evidentialist, almost, a non-evidentialist approach.
Thank you for this beautiful formulation of the issue. This is definitely intriguing. Let's start with a few things that are known to have been said by scholars, and I might support this by maybe personal stories. It's been known that Imam al-Haramayn al-Juwayni, who was rahimahullah the major professor, the professor of Imam al-Ghazali, the teacher. It's been, and he was, of course, Imam al-Ghazali took the gist of his knowledge from Imam al-Haramayn al-Juwayni. It's known that he said a statement towards the end of his life, rahimahullah, wishing to die that على دين عجائز نيسابور, like the elderly woman of Nishapur. What do these women have in terms of evidence? Nothing. Have nothing. I mean, there's no evidence. When I said personal story to support this, my mother passed away without ever, discussing anything in theology. But she had firm belief. Her certitude took her to Mecca for one Hajj and Umrah, one after the other. Her certitude. I mean, this is something that we tend to forget when we deal with the intellect and scholarly work. I'm not against this. I'm totally, Imam al-Ghazali, when he speaks about kalam, first of all, in al-Munqidh min ad-Dalal, deliverance from error, one of the translations of the title, he lists the Sufis and the Mutakallimin. There is a nuance there in the language, like let's say this side is okay, the Mutakallimun and the Sufis, and he lists the philosophers, and the Batinites, the esoterics, but we talk about the Ismailis really. He lists them on one side and he critiques and he dismisses their methodology and he stays now. He has two out of all schools that existed in Baghdad in the Muslim world at the time. And Baghdad was really a thriving. Just think of al-Farq bayn al-Farq of al-Baghdadi listing more than 70 schools of thought or groups. And he said that kalam is, what is it? You just take your premises from the statements of your opponent and you build on that. In the Ihya, in the revival of Islamic sciences, Imam al-Ghazali says that the role of kalam is like the role of the mutakallimun, rather, is like the role of the guards on the way, on the path, on the road of the pilgrims. If there are no highway robbers, you don't need the guards. So mutakallimun, you need them when there are those who will create, let's say, all these stories and Islamophobic stories and misinformation, and they just keep digging things in Islam. It's not really in Islam, but it's they just keep digging things and just hear, but that this is not part of Islam. But nevertheless, so, and I think, personally, I think that today we need kalam most. I hope that I'll be, I'm understood within this context. We need kalam most, because who's going to respond to Richard Dawkins, for example? The Muslim mutakallim. It's not the Muslim faqih in the restricted, narrow sense of somebody who knows all the details of ablution and prayer and zakah and hajj and sawm and this and that. That's not enough to respond, to the atheist, to the, the evolutionist, to the whoever is, to the radical feminist. I say radical feminist because really it's a total, from my perspective, really Islam is the Prophet Muhammad liberated woman from the burden of the Jahiliyyah, and their status was elevated. Just simply their graphically, the line shot up, just simply almost perpendicular compared to what they had in Jahiliyyah. But it's our problem if we don't understand this message. So the mutakallim today is capable of responding in ways that others might not be.
Brilliant. I mean, just before we get into the Risala, before I sort of mention sort of last question before we get on the text, Hujjat al-Islam does mention in the Risala al-Qudsiyya, فإذا في فطرة الإنسان وشواهد القرآن ما يغني عن إقامة البرهان. So even burhan is not necessary, but the fitra can be activated, and then that could lead to the understanding that there, or ma'rifah of Allah. Now there is a movement, Sheikh, like sort of within Islamic circles, of something, I call it fitra epistemology. I don't know what it's called, but there's this idea that we can dispense with proof, we can go straight to taste or there's something within human nature that is sufficient for us to appreciate, have ma'rifah of Allah, and appreciate religious truths and beliefs. What do you think about that position?
If we talk about personal salvific value,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. I mean, that's okay for the
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
As I said, all the old ladies that I know in the family,
Yeah.
none of them ever read or discussed this, or just they just believed, and they knew that this is really the case.
There was never مقدمة الكبرى صغرى والنتيجة.
No, there's nothing like this. So for personal, you are on the right path, and inshallah it'll be accepted. And what do you need? This is though Imam al-Ghazali, that he says in Ihya Ulumuddin that for children you need to teach. I mean, this is something you need to teach them faith. First of all, he says they need to memorize, because this is the aptitude, the potential for memorization at this stage, and the lack of deep understanding for the kids. Okay, subhanallah, kids might be able to memorize, and understanding comes later on. And he says you teach them something like the Risala later. Okay. So he's not, Imam Ghazali is not against, he promotes teaching the children the something like Risala al-Qudsiyya في al-Aqa'id. So this is important. Let's discuss the notion of fitra. Fitra, there are most of what we know is acquired. Okay? But there are certain things that are given to everyone, and there are certain things that are given, and by given meaning by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are certain things that are acquired. Most of what we know is acquired. There are certain things that are given innately to all people. There are certain things that are given only to the few. It could be a prophet, but it could be a friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It could be any one of us. And sometimes the Muslim and the non-Muslim in this, it's not necessarily in the area of faith. It could be in math, it could be in physics. Like ultimately, my understanding is that there was a gift that was given to Newton, there was a gift that was given to Einstein, there was a gift. So why to have that particular insight at that particular moment? Okay, it's a gift. Whether they recognize it or not, that's a different story. Whether we recognize these gifts or not, that's a different story. What we know is acquired. We can trace back every single, like for example, in my own context, at one point in my life, I did not speak English. And then I began, this is very strange. My mother, rahimahullah, rahimna ajma'in, she used to sit and teach me English without knowing that. I didn't know that she didn't know. And she memorized. I mean, it was very beautiful to hear her saying capital A, small a, capital B, small. She memorized this from my own, work at home with my, I didn't know that. She did not know, but she memorized while I was basically reading all this. You go back to a moment in history when you learn something. All of us acquired language. All of us acquired language except for one human being, Adam alayhi salam. Because we learn language from a social context. And he was the first human being, and he was devoid of a social context. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Adam al-asma'a kullaha. In Genesis, Adam names things on his own. That's cannot be reconciled with linguistics, with the theory of language, cannot be reconciled. You have to learn language through a context. For Adam alayhi salam, he was given that because it was not possible. Later on, the others, children, because the parents already have that kind of gift. But once we talk about that which is divine, the verse in the Quran is extremely not only important, but really the understanding. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made all humanity bear witness to His oneness, okay, to His existence, and they have it innately, okay, so that's entrenched in their fitrah. And so the fitrah itself is does not negate, Islam. I'm talking about faith. It cannot negate faith. And this is why Imam al-Ghazali mentions the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, يولد المولود على الفطرة فأبواه يهودانه أو ينصرانه أو يمجسانه, right at the beginning of the المنقذ من الضلال. And through that he says that it was something that was put in his chest to look at the kids when he was very young, look for truth, and he noticed that the children of the Jews became Jews, and the children of the Christians became Christians. Meaning, parents are not trustworthy in the absolute sense. We trust our parents, alhamdulillah, but they are not as a category. By being parent, that does not translate into true knowledge. And this is also by the same token, professors as a category does not translate into certitude in terms of this kind of knowledge. And this calls for a certain degree of doubt. I mean, the Imam al-Ghazali's methodology calls for doubting these sources, because your fitrah is still intact. Your fitrah is still there, and it will cause you. You should, if you allow your fitrah to manifest itself, you would know that what those parents, unless they are saying something in line with fitrah. I think the notion of fitrah needs more understanding, needs more exploration.
Definitely. Jazakallah khair, brilliant. Right, well, I guess we'll launch into الرسالة القدسية في قواعد al-AQA'ID. Now, some of our viewers may be familiar with this matter, and I found quite strangely, this is not the first textual creedal manual that's taught. Often it will be like Aqidatul Tahawiyya. Definitely in the subcontinent, it will be something like Aqidatul Nasafi, al-Aqa'id al-Nasafiyya. And obviously we've got Aqidatul Sanusiyya. So these are very well known. But I found in my personal experience, the Risala al-Qudsiyya is not a matan that he studied. And of course, Hujjat al-Islam was in al-Quds Sharif. When he penned it, he was in the Zawiyah, in the Bab al-Rahmah, which was later called Bab al-Ghazali after him, while he was there for so long. But I remember, Sheikh, when we were in Jordan, and you gave a presentation on the Ghazalian approach, the need for a Ghazalian approach. In light of that, and the Risala al-Qudsiyya being a sort of very small theological, in places very polemical text, what's the significance and the relevance of something like this matan of Aqidah? What would be its significance in the context of your broader appeal to Hujjat al-Islam and his approach?
I think one of the he is confirming that which has been before. First of all, right. In the area of Aqidah, you don't invent, you don't add, you explain. You just, and what becomes really apparent is that it's he takes but of course this is the Ash'arite, this would be the Maturidi. He takes he clearly demonstrates, at least he tries to show that once we talk about al-Asma wa Sifat, be wary of attributing notions that are that have roots in time and space. Okay, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of created categories, created reality. Therefore, ليس كمثله شيء becomes the of course it's the cornerstone, but it is elaborated, and you would avoid interpreting anything. It could be the arsh, it could be the yad, it could be in categories that have been created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created time and space, and it becomes prohibited to attribute that which is created to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to limit, okay, astaghfirullah al-azim, to limit Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to categories that He, to realities that He created. Time and space are created, and one should basically be very wary of this. And this is why when we come to, as a methodology, when we come to the hadith, I can give few examples, maybe a couple of examples only for brevity. So Imam Ghazali would say, let's talk about Imam Ghazali first. Imam Ghazali would say that the arsh, well, the arsh does not carry Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, the arsh and everything in the universe are carried. But if you listen to him, says, are carried by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also so that you will not think of being carried, that you have a physical touch that is really carrying them. بِلُطْفِ قُدْرَتِهِ. Okay, so he's again making a statement that will distance, that will create a certain and by distance again you need always to keep explaining it's not a physical distance. You are creating a certain understanding that you don't use anthropomorphic attributes in the real sense, taking them at face value. If I use the same methodology, once we talk about al-Samad, for example, some scholars, Allahu Samad. Al-Samad, some scholars said it is He who does not eat. Some scholars said it is He who does not have jawf. That's the exact word in Arabic, that and that will be some interior space, whether for us, the jawf for us will be where the digestive system exists. I don't want to go into to talk about human physiology. But the third one is the right category. It is He to whom He who does not need anything and who is needed by all. Okay, so this is something that this is why I will rule out number two altogether. It's not appropriate to include that as a possibility in the interpretation. And this is why once you understand what Imam Ghazali is saying, and not only Imam Ghazali, it will help you really. I can give another example where I apply this, for example, in the hadith about the last 1/3 of the night, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends during the last 1/3 of the night. Well, you know very well, and all of you know very well, that the last 1/3 of the night is a never-ending phenomenon. Okay, it continues forever and ever as long as there is day and night. The last 1/3 of the night is a continuous phenomenon. It's overlapping, meaning that if it ends somewhere else, it has already begun somewhere else west of where you are, and this is why there is no descending and then going up and then descending the next day. That's not really.
So, Sheikh, are you saying that the Risala al-Qudsiyya is just as much an extension of authority, like the authoritative past, as much as it is sort of like another sort of rational thinking?
There is enough rational thinking. There's enough. I mean, it's a sophisticated vocabulary, and you can say that every word there is for a meaning. certain notions, I love them very much. So for example, when Imam al-Ghazali speaks about the notion of injustice, okay? Injustice, he defines this as really taking action against the property of someone else. So for example, stealing is bad because you take some other person's property. Going to somebody's land and, you know, devastating the crops or the trees or the animals, and he says, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot do injustice because no one else has, you know, no one else owns anything in reality, okay? لا يصادف ملكا لغيره, okay? إن الملك إلا لله. So in reality, everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as such, there is no possibility of injustice. So for people who basically try to discuss divine justice, why is this, why is that? Well, just think about it for a minute. Everything in the universe belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every act is just. You know, whether we understand it or not, that's a different story, okay? Because the interpretation, meaning that it's basically, it's in here, it's in our intellect, it's in our hearts that we interpret things in ways that we shouldn't. Flip the coin and you'll find, you know, not, you know, that it's a total different perspective on things.
Jazakallah. I'm very conscious of time, and I know we've got to bring the audience in at some point. But just maybe a last question before we sort of maybe throw it out. I know we didn't get a chance to maybe unpack as much, but maybe we can in the Q&A or discussion. Now, Sheikh, some people might contest Hujjat al-Islam and say, okay, you are claiming this is a text based on authority and sound speculation, sound reasoning. But what about those who have, a different take on theology? They have a different posturing on theology that doesn't seem to mirror what Hujjat al-Islam is claiming. They have a different approach towards scripture, the divine attributes, as you mentioned, and they're claiming authority as well.
Let's basically, in my mind, I have two images of two lovely brothers who are associated with al-Aqsa Mosque. One of them is also an Imam, occasionally, you know, there. And he gives lectures there, and let's basically, you know, speak in. He is from the way he presents himself. He presents himself as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, meaning that he's Salafi, which I, you know, have no problem. Salafi in Islamic history, Maturidi, Ash'ari is really Salafi, but nevertheless, but also Ahl al-Hadith is Salafi. So it's not really an exclusive category for anyone, but this is how he defines. He loves Imam al-Ghazali, that's one thing. He is writing a book on Imam al-Ghazali, okay? There is certain sweetness, so we love to talk about Imam al-Ghazali. So that's really one. The second one, today as we were leaving al-Aqsa Mosque and later on with a young, you know, young but very beautiful spirit, subhanallah, we were talking about this issue. And I told him that, what do you do in the case of these verses? And he says he does not resort to ta'wil, he resorts to tafweed. That, you know, whatever is there, but he will stop right there. And I told him, but isn't tafweed in itself a recognition of the possibility of metaphorical interpretation? I'm not saying that he interprets himself, but the moment he stops, okay, the moment he stops is a recognition, because he stops because he does not want to make a mistake. He stops because he also realizes that ليس كمثله شيء. There are those who make mistakes, and you know, I don't want to attribute it to the school, but there are those who would make mistakes, and their language is language of tajsim, like it is really it is problematic to say the least. But the very position. So if you start, you know, if I may compare it like this, if you start with the verse, let's say يد الله فوق أيديهم, we meaning all of us, we start from the same position, and then we all recognize that ليس كمثله شيء is the key to understand such anthropomorphic verses, negating the immediate human experience and understanding, okay, of the notion of yad. And then we go into a different category. Their tafwid at this moment is in fact a prerequisite, like it's logically it's a recognition of the need for ta'wil, but they would stop right there. The Ash'ara and the Maturidi, they will go further in that step without saying that the choices of words to express the ta'wil, it is not, of course, revealed. It's not, of course, the ultimate in formulating the belief, meaning that other scholars, other students who could basically formulate using other words to express the same idea, but ultimately you cannot really say that it's anthropomorphic. Let me just simply utilize the moment because I need to say something. Human language is the product of here, meaning if now and here, in the sense of it's a very down-to-earth, literally it's a down-to-earth experience, meaning that once we talk about the metaphysical, we are very limited. We are limited by a language that is limited to an earthly experience that is not fit to speak about al-mawara'iyat, the metaphysical, that aspect of theology. So this is something that I wanted to share with you.
Brilliant. So we know that Hujjat al-Islam and Risala al-Qudsiya, obviously it's not an extensive text because he says it's just the lawami'. You get the flashes, and then he says you can read his Arba'in fi usul al-Din or his al-Iqtisad fi al-I'tiqad. So he has a kind of hierarchy of how to read some of his theological works. So, Sheikh, going back to obviously the relevance of Hujjat al-Islam, some people may say, okay, look, this Risala al-Qudsiya, it's a basic matan, definitely, but surely it's a product of its time. The adversaries that are the interlocutors with Hujjat al-Islam in that text, we don't have the same interlocutors anymore as such. And so the text was really perhaps only relevant for the 6th century, 7th century, but now we have different challenges, different interlocutors. As you mentioned before, Dawkins, the atheist horsemen, and horsewomen, by the way, in case people are also thinking it's just men. But so, is it relevant anymore?
No, I mean, as a methodology, it's going to be the same. I mean, the idea is, the
methodology.
Ultimately, you just look at the text and you try to formulate what do you do. You usually look at the sources and you try to build on what you have. We are not basically trapped by the past. We are simply enriched by this past. This heritage, this is very enriching without claiming, any sanctity for the work of scholars, but we should accord them their status as scholars. We are not competing with them. That will be a big mistake. And this is why all that we need to do is really make dua for all our scholars, all of them with no exception. Those who came into existence, those who are existing, and those, inshallah, who will come into being. And easy said, why not basically produce, a new basically work, doesn't to be in the sense of a matan, but do respond to any shubha that exists today. And there are those who do videotapes on YouTube, and it's wonderful. In Arabic, at least, there are those who try to do some work, but it's not like a more systematic, let's say, response to contemporary issues. I agree with the notion of emerging new challenging, that's true. But it does not mean that I need to cut myself off. It's not an umbilical cord. It's not that kind of relationship. It's more of a loving relationship, and knowing that those scholars spend their life trying to understand our religion, and we might as well simply look at their experience, learn from them, and if there is anything that we can contribute, so be it. I mean, there's no one who says, this is why, just simply think about it, we have never canonized any book of interpretation in Islam. Never. We will never do it. It's an ongoing process. Interpretation is an ongoing process. SubhanAllah, things unfold, the language, the experience, everything comes into. But let me say the following. In the Islamic worldview is reflected, epistemologically in the image of a garden of meaning. So this garden of meaning is Islamic. And next to it, there is a garden of meaning that is Jewish. And next to it, there's a garden of meaning that is Christian. And sometimes wind, because this is really in the physical world, winds basically blow in all directions, and we'll get some seeds from the next door, and they come into our garden. And this is what we call Israeliyat, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
We need to do some weeding, which is to get rid of these stories that are not really reconcilable with Islamic worldview. Say, for example, in our books of tafsir, it's against the Quranic message. The Quran says that Adam and Hawa both were warned against Satan's temptation. But he tempted them. They ate. The Quran uses the dual suffix pronoun, and it's neither, we don't have anyone singled out as the first one to eat like in Genesis. In Genesis, clearly it's Hawa. So we shouldn't say it's Hawa. But nevertheless, you'll find in our books of tafsir, scholars who said it's Hawa who ate first. Not in the Islamic worldview. This is why I say, let's weed as much as possible all these stories that came from the neighboring gardens of meaning. Let's have our garden. And when I say it's a garden of meaning, meaning that it has so many flowers, so many trees, so many plants, the possibilities are many, but we need to work within that framework of the Islamic worldview. Certain things that have been confirmed that originally were revealed to them, okay? You will find it also in, if it's necessary for us, you will still find it in the Quran, things that have been incumbent upon the people of the book. You will still find them incumbent upon us. The very essence of fasting being like people before us. The details are could be different, but the idea is we have a wholesome whole garden, and we need to tend to our own garden in a sense.
That is a beautiful analogy, Sheikh. That is, because I know you do a lot of interfaith. You've been at the forefront of doing a lot of interfaith discussion and dialogue. How much of Hujjat Islam finds its way into those discussions?
Oh, you would I mean, sometimes it's very beautiful when you try to bring Imam al-Ghazali to explain things from nowadays, especially if they ask you to explain, let's say that they ask you to explain fasting in Islam. The most beautiful thing is to try to explain fasting, going to the three categories that Imam al-Ghazali lists, Sawm al-Umum, where basically everyone abstains from food and drink and intimate relation between spouses. Then you move up to the Sawm al-Jawarih, which is basically you should only see that which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that you would see. You will, and also today is available not only in reality but virtual reality. You would say only that which is beautiful. Imam Ghazali speaks about 20 ills that the tongue is capable of, and there is no harm. I mean, no harm is done as much as the harm that is done by the tongue, and this is why the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, "Amsik alayka hada," hold on to your tongue. وهل يكب الناس على وجوههم وقال على مناخرهم يوم القيامة إلا حصاد ألسنتهم. This is really the fruit, the harvest. Ultimately, either people end up in paradise or in hellfire because of the tongue. The hands should abstain from stealing, killing, harming, torture, whatever, white collar, transferring accounts, whatever. And the legs should not walk in the direction of that which is prohibited. And then Imam al-Ghazali says, and all of you, out of politeness, so he would not mention, things like adultery and what have you. Then he says the highest level of fasting is where the heart is fasting, is abstaining, because as-sawm al-imtina', fasting is abstinence, where the heart is abstaining from everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So bringing Imam al-Ghazali to the picture it does save, it enriches the discussion. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
Brilliant. Right, so I think if you permit us, Sheikh, let's see if we can direct now, or bring in our audience now at this segment of the program. Let's see if there's any questions. I'm not sure if...
yes, I am there, yeah.
Yeah, Miz, I was just going to say...
Yeah, so we have one person who raised their hand, but they're gone now. Okay, so there was a question on the chat. Are you on the chat?
Oh, yes, let me just have a look. Yes, I am.
There should be some questions. There should be some questions.
Let me see. Okay.
There's one question from Muhammad Umar. What was al-Ghazali's final stance on kalam, and is it correct use and scope?
So the question, Sheikh, was what was Hujjat al-Islam's final stance on kalam? Did he have a position on it in the final sort of stages of his life, and what was the scope of that, and to what degree did he hold on to kalam?
Again, his position, as far as I know, is simply as much as is needed. So it has to be contextualized, and to translate Imam al-Ghazali's intention would be, Wallahu A'lam, is that we do need it today, because are there highway robbers we don't have highway robbers on the pilgrim's path, but we do have highway robbers on the path of knowledge, and metaphorically speaking. So we do need mutakallimun to defend the religion. I think this is really what is needed most. Essentially, we do need to learn how to pray and all these things, but ultimately I think the most of the challenges come from such quarters, and they are thriving. They are all over the internet. They are producing tremendous material that aims at Islam, and we are still yet to see more. I know, not knowing the ghaib, but I know what people are planning. They don't hide certain people, but inshallah we will remain steadfast in presenting this religion, inshallah, as is, in living. Because Imam al-Ghazali, let's not forget that what most of his admonition is against scholars. Let's remember, most of Imam al-Ghazali, when he mentions those who are who are doing injustice, they are this. He say it's the scholars. He wants the scholars really to pay attention, and he's warning against the worldly temptation that the scholars will be hooked to these things to the degree that they will inflict injustice upon themselves in terms of the hereafter. So let's put it this way: ultimately, it's going to be your own raka'at in the middle of the night. It's not going to be whether you are a traditional theologian, a classical theologian, an Ash'arite, Maturidi, Ahlul Hadith. Ultimately, it's going to boil down into having the right relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to have the sincerity, to have the right intention, to have these prostrations, in the middle of the night, when people are not aware of your ibadah and you are not talking to yourself about this ibadah. When this is why we tend not to understand the notion of fana for the Sufis, because really it's about trying to first minimize the ego, okay, to a point where it disappears. but you know, one has to. This is easy, easy said. It's a challenge.
You're right about that. I think Hujjat al-Islam mentions Imam al-Juwayni saying that Imam al-Juwayni used to spend many hours talking about the shatahat, the isharat, the i'taqadat of you know, all these rarefied things, but they never benefited from it except illa rukay'at raka'naha fi jawfi al-layl. So it's, you know, except the little prayers they did in the night. I think, Brother Muhammad, your question about kalam, Hujjat al-Islam, I think the professor's point is very important. He felt kalam to the degree that it was necessary. That was the degree to which, you know, he felt the commitment was required. So Risala al-Qudsiyya is in Ihya Ulum al-Din. So it was sufficient and good enough, he felt, to include it in the Ihya. So, and the Risala al-Qudsiyya is a kalam text. It's a kind of a kalam text. So I think that might indicate his view towards the end of his life, that he still held to kalam. Let me see if there's any other.
Yeah, we've got
points.
quite a few questions coming.
Oh, okay.
What's the main difference between the Risala al-Qudsiyya and the Ihya? In other words, would the readers gain differently from reading each respective text, perhaps thematically, practically? In what ways can Ghazalian epistemology address the challenges of postmodernism? And then we've got a few more. Maybe those two first.
So what's the difference between the Risala al-Qudsiyya and the Ihya?
Yeah, and what would readers gain differently from reading each text, each respective text, perhaps thematically, practically? And another question from Dr. Farah Ahmed: in what ways can Ghazalian epistemology address the challenges of postmodernism?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned postmodernism. Okay, the idea is, if we understand modernism and postmodernism in the following sense, modernism, modernity, if we talk about the Renaissance and onward, it's not the church-centric worldview anymore in Europe. I'm talking about the European, it's a Eurocentric worldview. And they moved in the direction of the humanity answering all questions. The Renaissance and modernity is the human being is the source of knowledge. And then we have reached the stage where we did not answer the questions about human existence. And if we allow ourselves to go let's say to the Big Bang theory, let's say, as is, we did not reach exactly time equals zero. We, as humanity, as the scholars, they have reached pretty much close to time equals zero. They don't understand, you know, why it took place, and even, you know, even theologically, philosophically, the question of what was before. Okay, what was there? I mean, this is something. I mean, it's so this is a Big Bang ex nihilo. Is that what it is? Which is really, it brings more theological, let's say, taste to it rather than physics per se. And if you talk about postmodernity, it's you know, if we are going to say one thing, multiple truths or non-truths existing on the same level, not really being able to point in the that there is no one truth per se, okay? And ultimately also I remember talking to Abdul Wahhab al-Masiri, rahimahullah, the Egyptian scholar. He said, for example, art and postmodernity, where art does not point to anything, it does not have a message, it does not point to anything outside of itself, okay? Which is really, I mean, if you question, what would Imam al-Ghazali or any of us as a Muslim, how do you respond to the idea of something that does not have a purpose, that does not point to anything outside of itself? Well, the Quran itself says that these things that exist in the universe point to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Alsun, the languages, are ayat pointing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Alwan, they are signs pointing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Alwan is that what we call today ethnicities, okay? Races, ethnicities. In English, you talk about the best level, the highest level, they talk about tolerance. In Islam, we talk about celebration. Once you talk about ayat coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is a message for me and I need to celebrate it, okay? This will take us into a different social order. Our relationship with, with each other, not qua Muslims, but also with the rest of humanity, will be totally different when ethnicity is celebrated, okay? I don't discriminate against any minority. I don't discriminate against anyone. So postmodernity, for me, is the loss of meaning. So a Muslim scholar, a Muslim would not subscribe to the loss of meaning. There is purpose for this life. We have been created for a solid purpose. To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are formal notions of worship, and creating a life of worship out of everything, in economics, in math, in the arts, in every realm of our activity, there is a possibility of contributing to a life full of meaning. And let's remember a meaningful life. How do you fulfill yourself? It's not how many people give you likes. It's basically whether you do justice to this notion of khilafah, whether you have fulfilled. And it's not the political office, because the political office is about one person ultimately. Khilafah is about each one of us, male or female. And let's remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, if the day of judgment unfolds and you have a seedling, a plant in your hand, if you could still plant it before it fully unfolds, meaning do good things until the very end of your life. So postmodernity, those who subscribe to it are really at a big loss. I cannot basically subscribe to a life without meaning. And we are searching for meaning. The meaning is here, but we are trying to enrich our understanding of these meanings, that we are surrounded by these meanings. We are engulfed by these meanings. We are, in fact, it's a very lavish life when you have meaning, and it's very poor, it's a starving life if you don't have meaning. What drives people to commit suicide? I'm sorry. What drives people to commit suicide? It's the lack of meaning.
Jazakallah Shaykh for that. I mean, the other question about the different books in the Ihya, I think that's a larger question, because obviously the Ihya, Hujjat al-Islam had different people in mind. He's writing for different audiences, a different subject matter defines the way he writes for each kitab in the Ihya. So his Asrar al-Sawm is different from Kitab al-Ilm. So I think that question is a very complex question.
There's a follow-up question from Wazir Bax. Postmodernity states there is no absolute truth. Through social construction, man will be able to come to an acceptable truth for the collectivity.
Right.
Comments.
Could you please paraphrase it was not audible 100%.
Okay, so postmodernity states there is no absolute truth. Through social construction, man will able to come to an acceptable truth for the collectivity. Maybe I can get Wazir online. I'm not sure if he's there. Wazir, if you are there, can I unmute you so you can maybe...
But is that statement itself a universal truth?
I mean, yes, exactly. I mean, let's put it this way.
Is Wazir there? I've just unmuted you, Wazir. Would you like to comment or add?
Yeah, no, postmodernity, basically what they are saying, because when we are doing training on, change leadership, they are telling us there is no absolute truth. So we ask them, how do we find truth? They say, okay, as a collectivity, we'll have to discuss and come to an agreement because we occupy the same space. So everybody keeps their own truth, but then you come as you this through social constructionism, you will come to that agreed truth that you will live by together as a collective.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very, you know, it's very clear now. It's very, very clear. Okay, politicians would love basically to have you know, a mishmash of, you know, of people who would reduce their identity into food. Okay, so you don't have a world view, but you have curry chicken. Okay, you don't have a world view, but you can. That's very very reductionist, and they think that the peace, they think that peace in the society would exist only if we simply flatten the identities, that we don't subscribe to our own identities. Well, I mean, historically, you know, did basically subscribing to the Islamic worldview have, you know, greater injustice to the minorities, the non-Muslims, or the other way around? Did it really, did they continue to, was there anything in the history of Islam like what took place in Myanmar, for example? We don't have that. We did not have that. We will not have that. I think it's the other way around. And people who are specialized in this area, they know that this is the truth, that people who subscribe to the Islamic worldview, really to the Islamic worldview, they will, you know, create great benefits for themselves and for the greater society. Okay, so social construction will always be there, and it depends. For example, the Prophet ﷺ in the what we call the Constitution of Medina, it did recognize Muslims and non-Muslims as members of. They are forming a new society. There's a new social order. Of course, there was a new social order compared to the Jahili paradigm that existed in Mecca, where it recognized simply the elitist, the rich, the powerful. It's different. So wherever we are, I think the answer is let's subscribe to the Islamic worldview, because it will, you know, bring greater good to the society in which we live, whether it's Islamic or not, you know, or not.
Okay, I've got a question from Betty and Robin. I'm not sure if they're, I'm going to unmute them. So let me just get them, because their hands have been up for quite a while. Okay, Betty and Robin, are you ready? I did unmute them. Okay, looks like they're not interested. Okay, move on to the next question. Safaruk, can you see the questions come through?
Let me just see if it's not my chat box.
Okay, there's one. As Muslims old and young are certain don't read Richard Dawkins, should we bother?
What's that question?
It's about Richard Dawkins.
Okay.
You know, as Muslims young and are certain don't read Richard Dawkins. I mean, basically, what is his response? I mean, should we be engaging with Dawkins and A.C. Grayling and folks like that, especially with the rise of the liberal atheists?
I mean, I think it's really important for the Muslim society, but it doesn't mean that every one of us will be engaged. It doesn't mean that every one of us has the capacity, the capabilities of engaging on this level. If that level of intellectual, even falsehood has sophistication, and as such, you need basically to address that by capable people. You need to understand where their arguments are coming from, and ultimately, it's I would say yes, we need to address every single school of thought. Maybe not every person, okay, but every school of thought we need to address. We need to understand, and if there's anything that is raised, to answer that. Yes.
Thank you. I think we can, we're coming to the end now, so there's no more questions coming through. I'll hand it over to Safaruk for Professor to summarize.
No.
Any final questions from yourself as well?
Yeah, no, thanks for the audience for engaging, really. I mean, obviously, due to constraints and time and format, of course, we're unable to obviously unpack everything that I'm sure the chef also wanted to mention, but I just wanted to say that, just put some closing thoughts. What we did try to do in this session was, we tried to we looked at a bit of Hujjat al-Islam's epistemology, how his use of kalam in articulating and, of course, defending theology. We also looked at, we discussed very briefly the text of al-RISALA al-QUDSIYA, which is a small tract of theology that is in the Ihya Ulumuddin, and it's about the fundamentals of Islamic belief as received through an authoritative tradition that uses intellectual arguments at the same time. And then we sort of went into some further discussions about the importance of Hujjat al-Islam's approach and methodology. And then we could have sort of just had a few points about the general. Oh, sorry, that's my little kid that just came in. Yeah. So if just give me 1 second. Sorry.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So then we went through the issues of.
Okay, shall I hand it over to the professor for until? Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
I mean, first of all, I thank you and thank your audience for this lovely engagement, and I look forward to future opportunities to elaborate on. We have just simply, this is only the surface, as we call. There's nothing like simply sitting down and studying a text literally line by line, word by word, and of course you try to contextualize this, which is I like very much.
You're teaching the Ihya every week, aren't you, in Masjid al-Aqsa?
I teach the Ihya at al-Masjid al-Aqsa 6 days a week, but they are 8 lectures, because on 2 days I have 2. So Sundays I have 2, Wednesdays I have 2 lectures. So that will bring the lectures into 8 lectures at al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Nowadays, because of the coronavirus, I deliver every day from home. From the end of March, I've been doing every day in Arabic, a lecture on the Ihya, at least in Arabic, and occasionally something in English. It's like a huge fountain, and one needs to spend really enough time to enjoy all these messages that fill the Ihya. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, Sheikh. We hope to invite you back to London again. I mean, it's been a few years now since we invited you last, but inshallah we hope. And there are, I mean, we have people from all over the world here. We've got about 30 countries watching this, as far as Guyana all the way to Indonesia, Malaysia, as well as Europe and US and Turkey. Alhamdulillah. I'm going to hand it over to our host, Safaruk.
My apologies for that. That was a little interruption there. But as we were saying, I really appreciate the Sheikh giving his time. It's been my honor to host the session. Again, we couldn't tease out much of the stuff, of course, that we'd like to, but that's given. But I would say our viewers, to follow what the Sheikh's work, what he's been doing, his research is fantastic. You'd always feel cleansed. And alhamdulillah, it's been, like I said, it's been a huge benefit for myself. And I encourage everyone to sort of tune in to see the research and the work that the Sheikh's involved in. So visit
Masjid al-Aqsa. They can go.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt,
and sit in the circle.
Masjid al-Aqsa. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, thank you so much, brothers and sisters. Really honored and privileged to have our distinguished guests, Dr. Safaruk Chowdhury, for hosting, and Sheikh Professor Mustafa Abu Sway for delivering an amazing session. We're hoping that he'll come back after Ramadan. We'll be having more Zoom sessions, maybe, and we're hoping that we can extend the invitation to do some things on the here as well. So I appreciate everyone. Thank you. You will be getting a recording. Just leave your email address. We'll send that over to you folks as well. Hopefully we should be sending all the recordings very shortly, inshallah. I wish you all the best and with du'as, and please remember us when you break your fast. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.